By the 50th year, after the defeat of the Alemanni, the Franks under Chlodwig had spread their influence throughout northern Gaul. The baptism administered by Saint Remigius meant that Frankish power spread easily in places where the predominantly Latinized population remained. To the west, the Franks bumped into the peninsula of Brittany, by then fully populated by refugees from the northern island, but not those refugees who had fled the Saxons and Angles from the cities. Those had chosen to join Siagrius and were now sworn to Chlodwig. Brittany was inhabited by simple, un-Latinized Britons from the western parts of the island, and they did not see the Franks as their own. The Frankish offensive had stopped here. The capture of Brittany was of no benefit, even the opposite. It threatened to incur the constant expense of maintaining the loyalty of the population. In the same way, the Franks were trapped in the northeast, in the wild lands of the Frisians, Saxons, and Thuringians. The lack of a fifth column of numerous Roman citizens in those lands led Chlodwig and his counts and dukes to conclude that once captured, all the locals could be seen as potential troublemakers and rebels. Very different were the lands of the Burgundians and Visigoths, southern lands densely populated by good Christians who, according to reports from spies and monks, dreamed of the coming of the Franks and were eagerly waiting for them to finally free them from Arian oppression. The borders between the kingdoms in those days, of course, no one drew, and therefore quiet aggression and raids were not considered for war. So after a while the Visigothic king Alaric II began to do what drove out brazenly penetrating the south of the Franks, who, taking advantage of their position, tried to strengthen here and there in the cities south of Orleans. Of course, this could not last long, and before the Arian kingdoms of Europe faced the Frankish question, which each of the kings decided in his own way. Theodoric the Great, having settled in Italy, first of all concluded dynastic marriages, giving away his numerous daughters to the Burgundians and Visigoths, and himself took as his wife Chlodwig's sister Audofleda. Theodoric, after his successful war, no longer sought to invade new lands and tried to foster peace between himself and his neighbors, even offering joint defensive alliances in case one neighbor attacked the other. Alaric II met with Chlodwig on an island in the middle of the Loire River and agreed on the division of borders along the river, and the kings parted very satisfied with each other, confident in peace and good neighborliness. Alaric this allowed to finally stop guarding the north from the Frankish gangs and to engage in Spain, and Chlodwig this peace untied his hands in his aggression against the Burgundians. In Burgundy by that time only two of Gundobad's sons remained. One, Gundobad, who had already killed two of his brothers, ruled the southern part of the country, and Godegisel the northern. The Franks had been disturbing the Burgundians for several years with their raids, but until peace was made with the Visigoths, they did not dare to fight openly. Finally, Godegisel wrote to his brother that Chlodwig's army had advanced and threatened to destroy the Burgundians just as the Alemanni had done before. Gundobad rushed to his aid, but it turned out that he was deceived. Godegisel secretly agreed with Chlodwig, and they jointly attacked his brother, defeating him near Dijon. The defeated Gundobad fled. Godegisel ceded his northern possessions to the Franks, after which he entered Vienne and remained there to rule, already considering himself the supreme king of the Burgundians. Chlodwig did not return, but on the contrary, increased his forces even more and followed Gundobad, besieging him in the southernmost Burgundian city, Avignon. The Franks laid siege to the city, but they had no engineers and no skills to take fortresses, so all they did was loot the surrounding countryside in the hope that the besieged would run out of food. Luckily, Gundobad, his advisor Aridius, came into the confidence of Chlodwig and offered him an even more favorable option, to change the ally and instead of Godegisel to support Gundobad, who pledged to become a tribute to the Franks. Chlodwig agreed, and having received the tribute for the first year at once, withdrew to the north, and Gundobad, boiling with anger, rushed to attack his Barat and besieged him in Vienne. The Burgundians were not far behind the Franks in the skill of siege, so they too encircled the city on all sides and waited for hunger to force Godegisel to open the gates. The latter, after some time, decided to secure himself with food and reduced the number of eaters, throwing all the useless, in his opinion, inhabitants of the city away. Soon one of the angry locals was brought to Gundobad, who did not expect to be considered useless and decided to take revenge on the cruel Godegisel. This was a local foreman who oversaw the waterworks and knew where the water supply tunnel led into the town. On his instructions, the Burgundian laborers used pickaxes to break up the stones that had once been laid on top of the water pipe, and then a squad of commandos entered the city. At a signal from outside, the spies seized the gates of Vienne, opening them to the stormers. Godegisel, who tried to hide in the Arian church, was killed along with the bishop. The Franks, who were in the city and locked themselves in one of the towers, Gundobad spared and sent to the Visigoths, after which he began to rule all the Burgundians as supreme king. The successes of Chlodwig, who after victories in Burgundy again defeated the rebellious Alemanni, could not but worry Alaric. The king of the Visigoths saw that in all areas that the Franks annexed to their crown, local Christians welcomed the Germans as liberators and could not help but realize that the inhabitants of southern Gaul also waited and called the Franks to expel the Arian hated them. Alaric II tried to remedy the situation by, on the one hand, stopping the persecution of the Nicene priests, and even allowed them to hold their own councils. But on the other hand, he very firmly suppressed their connection with Rome, hoping to form an autonomous Visigothic church, and also carried out targeted repressions against Francophiles, moving those suspected of sympathizing with the Franks to Spain, away from the border. The measures taken by Alaric were reasonable but proved insufficient. His reforms were never completed, and Chlodwig had already begun to make claims about the oppression of Christians in the Visigothic kingdom. 506th year passed in a tense diplomatic correspondence. Theodoric threatened Chlodwig war in case of attack on the Goths in Gaul. The king of Italy urged all the remaining small nations to unite against the aggression of the Franks. In turn, the cunning Byzantines incited Chlodwig to attack, promising support and promising to neutralize the Ostgoths. In 507th year, the Franks moved on the Visigoths. No one came to Alaric's aid. A Byzantine fleet was cruising around Italy, and these maneuvers forced Theodoric to leave his forces inland. Burgundy Gundobad, on the contrary, even joined the attackers. They were secretly promised access to the Mediterranean Sea. All minor kings joined the campaign of the Franks. They moved, confident in the support of the population, accompanied by many good omens, which they generously provided Christian priests. Fearing to lose the aura of the liberator, Chlodwig, passing through Tours, forbade his soldiers to take from the locals anything but water and grass. When one of the inhabitants complained that a Frankish warrior took hay from him, Chlodwig, not listening to the warrior's explanation that hay is the same grass, preferred to personally cut down the violator. Approaching Poitiers shortly before the battle, Chlodwig once again spread the order, which strictly prohibited robbery of the local population. Yet the fate of Gaul was decided not by propaganda, but by a brutal battle in which the spears of the Goths more than once crossed with the swords of the Franks. King Alaric was killed in the fight, but even after that, the battle was still going on, and Chlodwig himself miraculously survived, saved by his armor and his horse, when he was simultaneously struck by two opponents who came upon him. The Goths fled. Pursuing the Visigoths, the Franks soon came upon the fortress of Carcassonne, in which Alaric's 5-year-old son Amalaric had taken refuge. A long siege began. To the east, the Burgundians besieged their outlet to the sea, Arles. Chlodwig, having seized in Toulouse chests with Gothic treasures, spent the winter in Bordeaux and walked across the entire plain part of Gaul, easily capturing cities, from which the Visigothic garrison had long since fled. So, a huge area of Gaul came under the rule of the Frankish king. How the war of the Franks and Burgundians with the Visigoths will end, we will learn in the continuation.